Okay, let me just say this. There are a couple of things that have happened within the last several hours, and I know there have been several media requests. So instead of trying to respond to each person individually and separately, I elected just to call this impromptu news conference that you just got notice of probably about 45 minutes to an hour ago. There are two issues. One is dealing with the lawsuit filed by the ACLU with regards to our 6-point program to reduce homelessness. And the other issue, I think, pertains to the firefighters declaring an impasse and walking away from the table. So let me try to deal with them both and then take questions that you may have. With regards to the first issue, the filing of the lawsuit by the ACLU, they filed a lawsuit against the city of Houston. We have not gotten served with it as of yet, so we're responding to what we have seen in response to the lawsuit against the city of Houston in response to my 6-point holistic plan to address homelessness in the city of Houston. We are working, the city of Houston is working with more than 100 community partners to respond to homelessness, and we've been working with them over the last, for quite some time. Let me put it that way. Over the last 5 years, the city of Houston we have reduced homelessness in the city of Houston by 8,000 individuals. And in fact, the number on the street we suspect right by now is the number that's homeless is about 3,600, and the number that's on our streets is about 1,100 when you consider those who are chronically homeless. And Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong. The city's initiatives are not intended to adversely affect anyone's constitutional rights, but rather to balance the legitimate public health, safety, and welfare of all citizens in the public space. We should all agree, and I hope we can all agree, that one person living on the streets is one too many. And the critical question is, how do we help people to transition from being on the street to a better place in their lives? While there are some who might have us do nothing, and based on my reading of the lawsuit filed by the ACLU, they would ask us to do nothing. And others who might never accept any plan that we propose, we have chosen to work with those living on the streets on a 1-to-1 basis to assess and address their individual needs and provide compassionate and meaningful solutions. Make no mistake, this is a public safety issue, and we cannot bury our heads in the sands and pretend that it does not exist, because it does. The question is, what is the best way or ways to transition people from living on the street, who may have ended on the streets for multiple factors, and then transition them to a better place. And we always recognize, and I've repeatedly said, that the number one strategy to reducing homelessness is to provide people with permanent supportive housing. That is the number one strategy, and that is a part of the 6-point plan, and has always been item number one. It does take time, patience, and compassion to encourage some of our most vulnerable citizens to receive the help that they need. And as we outlined, the goal has been and really continues to be to provide permanent supportive housing to about 500. We initially said over 6 months. We may be get a little bit delayed on that because of the funding that's been cut off from the feds in D.C., but we are working to help to fill in the gap in that funding, and I'm going to be talking to the members of City Council very, very soon, because we think we have found a way to come up with that additional funding that we need, which is about $2.1 million, to provide permanent supportive housing to that 500 number over the next, it may be able to the next 6 to 8 month time period, but I think we are we found a way, at least I'm optimistic, of providing that funding. But the critical component is this, and the instructions have been very clear. No one has received any citations. We have been out there over the last couple of months, along with our coalition partners, talking to people on a case-by-case basis, one by one, explaining to them that we're here to assist them, to help, to transition them to a better place, explaining to them, for example, that we want to provide accommodations for them, either in shelters or permanent supportive housing. Everyone, and I think some of you may have talked to some of the HOT team members on Friday of last week, made it very clear that our initial goal is to try to, number one, we're not asking anyone to move without providing them with an option. That's critically clear. And anyone who chooses to stay, no one is forcing anyone to move. But we are simply saying that when it comes to tents, and there are tents out there, when it comes to sofas and mattresses and all of these big items out there that create a public health concern, not only for those who are out there who are homeless, that's what the ordinance is focused on. And then at the same time, we're not necessarily asking anyone to give up their items without us also trying to provide either storage for those items, and we're looking for that space so that their people don't have to, let's say, relinquish themselves of the items that are out there. And up to this point in time, many of the people out there who are homeless have voluntarily given up those items, things that they don't need themselves, and really were out there assisting us over the last few weeks in that regard. So that is the essence. You know, my read of what the lawsuit says is that the city cannot do anything. Can't do anything, but recognize that this is public space. We're talking about what is occurring in the public space, and the city is put forth a 6-point strategy that creates a very delicate balance between everyone who has the right to utilize the city's public space, okay? Everyone who has the right to utilize that public space, and to do it in such a way that everyone can utilize that space and do it and without, let's say, vetoing the rights of anyone else. Now that's on that issue as it relates to the lawsuit, as it relates to ACLU. And I respect the organization, but I do strongly disagree with the position that they are taking. On the issue as it relates to the firefighters, I think Local 341, and the word I got was that they had made a comment that the city has walked away from the table. I don't know where that came from. And so let me be as poignant as I can. The city has been at the table. The city continues to be at the table. And based on a letter that was issued to the local on May the 12th, which was Friday of this past week, and let me read it to you. Dear Mr. Teleps, attached, please find the city's request to extend the 2017 collective bargaining by the incremental period of 15 days as permitted by state statute. The city's invitation to return to the bargaining table during the week of the city's invitation to return to the bargaining table during the week of May 22nd remains an option to conclude negotiations of a successful agreement. The city has not walked away from the bargaining table. The firefighters have chosen to walk away from the bargaining table. The city continues to be where we've always been. And I think what needs to be made very clear is this. We're doing in the collective bargaining process, okay? That's taking place. We're also in Austin dealing with the pension issue. Both of these things are taking place at the same time. Under the current situation, in the absence of pension reform, okay, the firefighters' pension cost consumes about 33.2% of the city's payroll. 32.3% right now. In the absence of pension reform, the pension cost for firefighters alone will exceed 50% of payroll. Okay? 50% of payroll in the absence of pension reform. Okay? That's on the pension side. And let me add now, let me be very clear. Firefighters are fighting us in Austin on pension reform. But right now, the cost of payroll is 33.2% of payroll for firefighters. In the absence of pension reform, it shoots up to 50+% of payroll. At the same time, we're engaged in collective bargaining. And the major issue is on pay raise. And the firefighters are asking for 6% this year, 6% the second year, and 8% the third year. I think I got that right, or did I mess up the numbers?
I think that's right. Mm-hmm.
I think it's 6, 6, 8. You're right, 6% the first year, 6% the second year, 8% the third year. There is but one city, okay? We do not have different cities. The same city of Houston pays the pension costs. The same city pays the payroll for firefighters, as we do for all other employees. Firefighters are fighting us in Austin on pension costs, okay? They're fighting us. But they're demanding at the same time more pay. The two do not add up. The two don't add up, okay? We are not in a position to talk about pay raises when we are trying to reduce the pension costs in Austin, Texas, that the very same people at the table are fighting us in Austin. I think the general public understands that, okay? We are not printing money. We don't have a printing machine. And at the same time, the budget that I've submitted to City Council for their review is trying to balance a budgetary shortfall of $123 million, all at the same time, okay? Now, I fully recognize firefighters have not received a pay raise since 2014. We understand that. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean that there have not been payment progressions, okay, because there have been. Doesn't mean that there hasn't been overtime, because there has been, okay? There has been. But the bottom line is that the city remains at the bargaining table. We remain at the bargaining table. And we want to be fair to firefighters. We want to be fair to every city employee. But I do think it's disingenuous to put the city in a squeeze play. And what I mean by that, and some of you here, reporters, you all know, some of the same people have gone and talked to you about the equipment that's failing, okay? They want better equipment. So do I. They want the pay raise. I think I want to make sure that they are paid respectfully and for the work that they are doing. But they're opposed to reducing their pension costs. Pension costs, equipment, pay raise, they are demanding all three at the same time from the same city that's having to balance its books with a shortfall right now of $123 million. I would like to think that the average Houstonian understands that. So I wanted to speak to that. We will remain at the table. My goal, my hope is that we can work all of these things out, and we certainly intend to do that. But I do think we just have to put things in perspective, and that's why, I wanted to speak to it today, okay, so that we don't kind of get things, out of sequence, out of whack. That's having said that, I'll stop and take any questions you all may have. Sure.
I think, so in the beginning, you sort of said that the lawsuit was targeting the holistic approach, but it seems to really only be targeting the ordinances. And I think everybody would agree that the success of the housing efforts over the past several years was very much due to the trust that volunteers had to build with these homeless people. I've heard it from the homeless people, I've heard it from the volunteers. Those relationships took a lot of time to build.
Sure.
So how do you think that's going to affect that trustful relationship now when you're hurting their dignity in this way?
We're doing what now? I'm sorry, I can barely.
They feel that that their dignity is.
Please hold the door for a second.
So when you're going through telling them you can't have this tent, you can't have this mattress, you can't have too many belongings, you can't have the. I mean, how do you expect them to want to take the help from you guys if you're? Well,
I've been out there on the street and I've talked to many of them. Okay. and they do want the help. And there are many out there who do want to who want to transition to a better place, okay? And we're offering help. And many of them out there have taken up. I think over the last few months, how many people have we been able to transition over the last couple of
142.
142.
Chronically homeless.
Chronically homeless. So when you look at where Houston used to be, a total of, let's say, about 8,800, okay? That number has come down by 3,300. The number of people that I think that are actively on the street is about 1,100 that represent the chronic population. That's the hardest population, okay, to address. But you also see in the city of Houston a proliferation of people with tents, and those tents are expanding. The encampments are expanding, okay? That's more than what used to be, okay? So you've seen the expansion. The key, we all recognize, the key to reducing homelessness is providing permanent supportive housing. That's item number one. I don't want people to lose sight of that. That's item number one. That's what we've stressed from day one, permanent supportive housing. We also recognize that there are many people who are on our streets that are suffering from mental or behavioral health issues. And we certainly are looking for and fighting for every additional dollar to provide, to meet people's needs, especially those who are suffering from mental behavioral health issues, or those who, where there's substance abuse, okay? We need more treatment facilities, and we're working desperately on that. The key is, how do we then strike this delicate balance, okay? For those, for example, who may just say, this is where we want to be, and we are saying, number one, is that we have a shelter for you, or we have permanent supportive housing, and we want to assist. We're not telling anybody to just leave this space. We're not telling anybody to leave this space, okay? What we are saying is that we do have options for you, especially when you're talking about the tents and the sofas and the beds and things of that nature. And we're certainly interested in reducing the tents, the sofas, the beds out there. We're interested in doing that. We're also saying is that we are providing space. We're providing space for people's belongings, okay? So we're not out there just picking up people's belongings and throwing them away. We're not doing that. No one can say one single time, give one single example, where the city has gone out there and forcibly removed anyone.
No, it was very clear that
right.
The police were not confiscating.
We're not doing that.
They still feel you're asking them to do away with these things in order to get help, or else they will be charged with a crime. Are you concerned that putting a crime on their record will be a barrier to...
But you want to go to the crime example. What I am simply saying to you is that I hope you will agree with us that remaining on the street, just for the sake of remaining on the street, is not a good option even for people on the street. I hope you will agree that if there's one person on the street, that's one person too many. And so the question then becomes, how do we, in a very compassionate and a humane way, transition them from the street to a better place in their lives? And for some people, you will have to nudge. But where we are right now, we're providing information, okay? We're letting people know what the options do exist, okay? We're out there cleaning up in the spaces around them. And just like on Friday, many of them were assisting our workers out there putting things in dumpsters that they did not want. They were helping out, okay? So we are working with them on a case-by-case basis. And in some cases, it's a step-by-step process. But if the position is, if you're saying to the city, as ACLU is saying, Mayor, you can't do anything. But that's what the ACLU is saying.
They're saying just...
No, they're saying
to charge people with a crime.
They're saying you cannot remove tents, you cannot remove sofas and beds, you cannot remove any of the items that are associated with people out there. That's what the ACLU, read the petition. They are saying to the city, you literally cannot do anything. You can't do anything. And if that is their position, then essentially you are tying our hands from doing anything other than simply saying we're going to provide housing. But it's a step-by-step process. It's a step-by-step process. Okay? You have, and at the same time, we're talking about the public space. Okay? And everyone is entitled to utilize the public space. It's not owned by any one person. It's not. And so there is a balancing. As it relates to the city, it's a balancing. For example, let me just put it this way. Does a person that's disabled have the right to utilize the sidewalks? I think the answer is yes. So if a person is in the sidewalk with a tent, blocking the sidewalk, does that person have a greater right than a person who's disabled in their wheelchair? Who has the greater right? And I think the city's obligation is to balance the rights of people to the public space. That person who's in the wheelchair has a right to access that sidewalk. Okay? It's a balancing of interests. It's a balancing of interests. That is our responsibility when it comes to property of the public space. And if we can, through a 6-point strategy, move people or transition them to a better place in their lives, then I think that's I think that is a good thing for all parties concerned. Yes, sir.
What do you say to those people like living on the north side, for example? You remember little Josue Flores that got murdered back in May, I believe, 2016. And all that neighborhood, you go over there and you ask them, they are fed up with the homeless crossing their neighborhoods and committing crimes to some of them. And what do you say to those people? Because a lot of them are fed up with the whole situation. They say that actually the city is acting too slow.
Well, that's right. On this end, you're saying you do it too much. On this end, you're saying you're not doing enough. The city, and we are but one city, okay? It's balancing competing interests. And that's why we have invited faith-based communities, the clergy from all denominations to join with us, and they have been joining with us. That's why part of this campaign, even as it relates to panhandling, is meaningful change, not spare change. And you had nearly 100 members of the clergy that were standing with us last week, okay? Also partnering and being a part of this program. Over 100 Homeless Coalition partners partnering with the city. And that it's balancing. There are some people who wanted us to do even more. Some people would argue the city didn't go far enough. There are some who argue that we went too far. Well, it's a delicate balance. It's a delicate balance.
Mayor,
Yes.
In the last 2 years, since I gather a Supreme Court decision called Reed, courts have more often struck down some of these types of regulations. Do you have any confidence that the cities will survive this challenge?
I have a great deal of confidence, and I think even in those cases, Mike, it's when the cities, for example, didn't provide options. When the city simply just went out there and said, you got to go. We're not forcing anybody to leave a certain location. We're simply saying there are certain things you cannot have at that location. It doesn't go to the person. If a homeless person, for example, wanted to continue to remain under the underpass in Midtown, that person can still remain there. We're simply saying that when it comes to tents and cooking equipment or things that cannot fit in within a 3x3, you can't have those items. But if a person wants to remain where that person has been, though we would prefer that you be in housing, shelter, permanent supportive housing, we're not forcing you to move. And so I think that's the difference between the city of Houston's strategy and some other cities where those ordinances have been challenged and been challenged successfully. We've tried to strike a balance.
One of the claims in the lawsuit, as I gather, is that the city is regulating the content of speech by saying that Fill the Boot and Girl Scout cookie campaigns are allowed, whereas panhandling is not allowed under those regulations. What's your response to that idea?
Well, one, it goes to it's the public safety issue itself. We're not trying to outlaw anybody's speech, okay? It is a public safety issue, and it's about egress and the passage, the right of people to utilize that space. There's an ordinance right now, I believe that's on the books, and the city attorney can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you cannot block the sidewalk. Let's say if you're in your driveway and your car is blocking that sidewalk, you can be ticketed. Right now, ACLU hadn't sued the city because people have a right to utilize that sidewalk. You cannot block the sidewalk. Prior to these two ordinances, you can't do it. It is in that same spirit that we've adopted the panhandling ordinance. You cannot block the sidewalk. You cannot block traffic going from one point to another, okay? We're not regulating speech. And we still allow, in some cases, I think permitting. Don't we still allow permitting? Yeah, if you go and get permitted, we're not stopping you. And what we are saying to people in the city of Houston is, look, we're not telling you not to give. We're simply saying redirect your giving in such a way that your giving can be more impactful and that you can have a meaningful impact on people's lives. And that's why we're saying meaningful change and not spare change. And we talked for quite some time with the faith-based community, the clergy, nonprofits, over the last several weeks. Last week, we met with about 100 of them who signed off on the campaign. So again, this is not about telling Houstonians, don't be compassionate. But it is about saying to Houstonians, if there is a better way to assist people who are in need, and we can be more impactful, then and we can be safer, then why not take this route, okay? And so we are saying to people, meaningful change, not spare change. It's just redirecting one's giving. But if anyone makes the argument that we are not compassionate or that we don't care, okay, I beg to differ with you. I do care, okay? We are compassionate, but we are more interested in providing a holistic change that's positive for the people that are on our streets, and we are more determined to put them in a better place in their lives. And for those who are simply saying to us, Mayor, just maintain the status quo and don't do anything. Just don't do anything. Maintain the status quo. I would say to them, that is unacceptable. That is not an acceptable option. It is not. But we are trying to put forth steps that are positive, that are impactful, and that can get people back on their feet so that they can take care of themselves and their families. That's the whole purpose of these ordinances and the whole purposes of the 6-point strategy. Not just 2 ordinances, but every single point.
Mayor, there was also just one last thing. My colleagues have talked to some of the folks under the underpasses and whatnot. When you're saying about providing them options, not necessarily forcing them to move from one spot to another, when their belongings are relocated, obviously that would raise the odds that they would seek shelter rather than remain where they are. And they say that many of the shelters only have overflow spaces rather than actual spaces, so they're on the floor or they're in the hallway, that sort of thing. Could you respond to that?
The shelters are working with us. Star of Hope and many of the others are working with us. But this is what I think the piece that is missing. Unless we're providing you with an option, okay, we're not trying to force you away. When we are going out, Mark and his team, and Mark, you can certainly speak to this, because this is one guy that's been out there on the ground with the teams quite a bit. We are assisting people in providing them with options. This is not, you got to go. And we don't care where you go, or you can't have this stuff here. No one is going out there with that approach.
But I guess, is an overflow spot on the floor in a shelter right now, while we ramp up the rest of the program, is that sufficient enough of an option?
No, Mark, why don't you come and address what we are saying to individuals? Let me also say to you, even as we speak, the Way Home and Star of Hope, for example, they are building an encampment right off of 288 and Reed Road. Shelter. I'm sorry, shelter. I said encampment. Okay. Shelter. But it's more than a shelter. It's housing, it's dormitory space, it's a cafeteria, it's a chapel, there's a multi-service center, and a cafeteria that will feed about 500-600 people. As we speak, that's taking place right now as we speak. And a part of what we intend to do is to take you all around so we can show you the spaces that are available and what's being done as we speak. Okay? And there's housing for those who are housing appropriate. For individuals, for example, that may be have some mental behavioral health challenges, there's dormitory space that's appropriate for their status. Okay? There are employment opportunities there. We're putting a transportation, a bus stop, a transit stop right there on the premises for them. And it will house about 1,100 homeless women and children and even men with children. That's taking place. That's being constructed right now. So we are building even added capacity. And while we are doing that, we are simply out there talking to people, explaining, because this is not you go out one day and you're done. For many of the people that we are talking about, because they are people, you have to talk with them over and over and over again. It's a case by case by case situation. And I don't want that to get lost. It's so easy just to focus on ordinances, as the ACLU did, without focusing on the 6-point strategy and what is actually taking place. And quite frankly, we are assisting in putting people in a better place in their lives. And it's not heavy-handed. And I think many of you have talked to members of the HOT team, and they can tell you. They have been instructed. We're not trying to be heavy-handed. We're not giving out any citations. But there does come a point where you have to gently nudge people from where they are. And I don't know about you, but even in my own family, there comes a point in time where you have to gently nudge people from where they are to better transition in their lives. You have to. And if you take that away, then what ends up happening, people, they simply stay where they have been. And the number grows. Mark.
So on some days, some of our shelters, their bed space is completely used. But as a compassionate city, they make their ends meet, and we see how we can help out. We put mats on the floor. We do whatever we have to do so that every individual has an option. And let me tell you, whether given the choice of sleeping outside in the elements or sleeping indoors with running water, electricity, flushing toilets, AC, and with being a mat, I choose the mat any day over that, personally speaking. So we've worked with these shelters to make sure that even if a bed is not available, that there's still room for them to get them out from the elements inside where there's additional services so that we can help these individuals move off the streets for good.
And let me just, and I'm going to close with this. Because when I was out there, you had a couple out there living under a tent. The woman was pregnant with twins under this tent, and the facilities were not the best. You mean to tell me it's okay that the city shouldn't be doing everything we can to put this mom and dad, when the mom's pregnant, in a better place, to transition them better in their lives? You mean to tell me that's okay? Let me just be very clear. This is hard, okay? This is hard. It is hard. And in trying to address it, we have to reach a delicate balance. But one thing I do know, To do nothing is not the answer. Now that I do know. And I'm not talking from a perspective of some rich guy. I'm talking about from a perspective of someone who has been poor, lived the poor experience, okay? So if you want to help me, don't just say, just leave me where I am. No. No. It's hard. But to maintain the status quo is not the answer, and it's not the Houston way. And with all due respect to the ACLU, I respectfully disagree. Thank you so very much.